With Matt Rhule officially out in Carolina, could the New Orleans Saints actually consider trading Sean Payton within the division? We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert credential member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays, a Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at BetOnline, where they've got more odds, lines, and props than ever before. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. On today's episode, Weber State legend Rasheed Shaheed, New Orleans Saints undrafted free agent, is expected, according to reports, to be elevated from a practice squad this week and this weekend in order to maybe provide the New Orleans Saints some help at return specialists with Deontay Hardy out. What might we see from him and what have we seen from him before? Alvin Kamara's usage on Sunday against the Seattle Seahawks, even though against a very weak defense, was still nothing short of brilliant. We'll break that down. But first, I want to start off here within the division with what is probably the biggest story around the NFL right now that doesn't have to do with NFL officiating and roughing the passer calls, is the firing of Carolina Panthers head coach Matt Rhule. After going 11-27 in his stint in the NFL, it looks like he might be headed back to the college ranks, which means that there's going to be a head coaching position open within the division here in the NFC South. So we're not here to look at it from the Carolina Panthers perspective, but if you want to hear about that or see that, you can check out Locked On Panthers with Julian Council. He'll break it all down for you. But from the New Orleans Saints perspective, would they actually consider trading Sean Payton's rights within the division to the Carolina Panthers if that's where Sean Payton decided that he wanted to go? It's a really interesting question. I know a lot of people would rush to say no, but hold on, because all of this comes down to, what are you getting in return? Nick Underhill over at NewOrleans.football has a fantastic piece that you can find over at his website right now, breaking down his discussions with current and former GMs and executives about what they believe the price for Sean Payton will be. I'm not going to spoil the piece, so let's just focus a little bit on what the John Gruden piece was, right? The John Gruden trade from the Oakland Raiders, then Oakland Raiders, to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 2 firsts, 2 seconds, and about $7 million in cash money. So let's focus on multiple firsts, I think is the I'm sorry to keep using the phrase, the first place. It's the immediate place that you go with all of this. Carolina Panthers have a lot to choose from here in terms of what their draft capital is moving forward. So they can afford to, well, I don't want to say they can afford to give up 2 firsts, one this year, one the upcoming year, but they have sort of that stockpile. The issue is that right now, with Matt Rhule having been fired this early on in the season, it's very likely that that first round pick in 2023 could be something like, I'm just going to cautiously say a top 10 pick, but we could be talking about top 5 pick in this area. So does that impact what it is that you would be able to get from the Carolina Panthers? Obviously, trading him within the division would mean that the New Orleans Saints would want a king's ransom. They would want that top 5 pick. They would want the next year's pick. They would want that top 5 second round pick, that sort of top 35, top 37 selection in this year's draft. They would want that second round pick next year. They would absolutely run up the price on the Carolina Panthers. And you know what? If the Carolina Panthers say, yeah, here's a top 5 pick for the head coach, you're going to have to trade to somebody anyway, because it's very unlikely he goes to New Orleans. So I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't fully rule that out. But it seems like the New Orleans Saints are pretty content with where they are right now, although they sit at a 2-3 record in the meanwhile. But if some of that has to do with how they feel about where they are at the quarterback position, or they feel that that has to do with the quarterback position, and they feel like that's a question that they need to answer next year, free agency is probably not going to be the route to go. The draft might be the route to go in 2023, unless you want to wait until 2024 to address that, which I don't think that this team, with a lot of veterans on the defensive side, with some unique veterans on the offensive side as well, I don't think they want to try to wait any longer than they have to continue to compete. So the draft might be the way to go. So if you can get a top 5 selection from the Carolina Panthers, you say yes. You might not even walk away with multiple firsts in that scenario, right? Because you're getting a top 5 selection. you might not even walk away with multiple seconds in that scenario. You might get a first and a second and maybe some, cash to help offset things in terms of the contract and all that. You can do that when it comes to coaches. You just can't do it when it comes to players. Do you say no to a top 5 selection if you know that quarterback is something that you're going to have to address this offseason, if that's what they feel by the end of this season, which remains to be seen? Would Sean Payton even want to go to the Carolina Panthers, which is the other part of this? Would he even be interested in going to the Carolina Panthers, who don't have a very strong offense and who have major questions at the quarterback spot, as opposed to going with, let's say, a team that I have pinned Sean Payton to so far a bunch this offseason, which has been the Los Angeles Chargers? He's got Coach Lombardi out there. He's got Coach Nugent out there. And of course, he's got a stellar young quarterback in Justin Herbert, who he can effectively and affectionately refer to, just as Deuce Wyndham and I used to do over at the Who Dat Confessional podcast, Justin Abear, if he wanted to, bringing the Cajun over to LA. That could be a route that he wants to go. Now, the Los Angeles Chargers have not been as stellar as we expected them in terms of opening up the season, but you're not going to get nearly as good a draft pick there as you were going to get from like the Carolina Panthers, for instance. So if the Panthers are willing to part ways with a top 5 selection, a top 10, top 7 selection, and Sean Payton wants to go there and doesn't feel like, hey, you trading away that first round pick makes it impossible for me to be successful in terms of looking at David Tepper and the Carolina Panthers in that situation, then there could be a perfect marriage there. And then all of a sudden you're seeing Sean Payton twice a year with what weapons, things like that, right? He's still the most innovative offensive mind in today's game when it comes to the NFL scheming, taking advantage of mismatches, play drawing, all of these other things that he does. But if he doesn't have the weapons to work with, is he that much of a threat right now? But he could become a threat, obviously, over time. So there's a route and there's a way that the New Orleans Saints could do that, but you have to imagine that they're going to run the price up big time in terms of trading within the division. But the good news is that if the Carolina Panthers are interested, if the Denver Broncos end up moving on from Nathaniel Hackett, if the Los Angeles Chargers end up in a situation to where they're looking for a coach after Staley, and let's just say the Dallas Cowboys, of course, are in that mix, though hard to see them in the mix right now, winning games with Mike McCarthy at the helm with Cooper Rush as their quarterback while Dak Prescott's out. But if you get those 4 teams in there, that's your best case scenario, especially if you can get a couple of others, because Sean Payton's going to be at the top of everybody's head coaching list next year in terms of trying to get him away from the New Orleans Saints. So the good news is, even if you don't want to trade him within the division, there's still value to a team within the division needing a quarterback and very likely being interested in a Sean Payton, because then that creates the bidding war, that runs the price up. That's how the New Orleans Saints get that king's ransom, even without trading him within the division. So even if they don't trade him to the Carolina Panthers, all is not lost in terms of getting very, very good compensation back in return for the head coach that is currently still under contract with the New Orleans Saints, meaning that they will have to trade his rights to the team that he wants to go to. The way that process breaks out is pretty simple. Mickey Loomis will have the conversations first. They'll sort of agree on a price, and then he'll grant that team the opportunity to talk with Sean Payton. And then if all goes well there, then the parameters, trade parameters, and everything would be in place before the team even visits with Sean Payton. So as long as then that works out and Sean says, yeah, I'll go there, I want to go there, then they'll trade the rights there. Now, the interesting piece will be if there's a place that really wants Payton, and if there's a place that Payton not necessarily wants to go, there's another place that he wants to go, but then the trade offer isn't as good there. How did the New Orleans Saints handle that situation? How do you walk the line between the maintaining the relationship that you have with the best coach of your franchise's history and the only coach to bring your franchise a Super Bowl championship, and the compensation that you want to receive back for him? How do you walk that line if you are the New Orleans Saints? And I am proud to say that although the Locked On Podcast Network is foolish enough to pay me to do this job, which I love so much and would almost be willing to do for free, don't tell them I said that, I'm not getting paid to make those kinds of decisions like the New Orleans Saints would have to in that scenario. So I'm going to let Mickey Loomis handle that one. Coming up next, we're going to break down Alvin Kamara and his usage and why 194 yards seemed pretty quiet thanks to 4 touchdowns by Taysom Hill. But why did everything all of a sudden work when it came to Alvin Kamara and the New Orleans Saints? Yeah, some of it has to do with how bad that Seattle defense is, but there are a lot of things that you can see here that show you that the New Orleans Saints are, let's just say, taking the right steps to building and finding their identity through their star running back, where they should have been building it all along. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. But first, I get the opportunity to tell you about our friends over at Tommy John. Tommy John, think of the most comfortable pair of underwear you've ever owned, most comfortable pair of lounge pants you've ever owned, most comfortable lounge wear you've ever owned. Tommy John, if you're not thinking of them already, they're better than that. And Tommy John is awesome. Fall can sometimes be like chaos in your pants. You're overheating 1 second, you're freezing the next second. So to be ready for anything, you have to have the underwear that can handle everything. And that's where Tommy John comes in. You are that much more comfortable. So you're able to do everything better. I told Luke Braun the story the other day. I put on a pair of Tommy Johns the other day, jumped over a building. You can't tell me I didn't do it. You would be lying if you said that I was lying, because, you know, they also have innovative ways that they approach the underwear as well to make sure it's maximum comfort as you go through with all of it. And they have sold over 17 million pairs. So people love Tommy John underwear. Absolutely no doubt about that. And that's why Tommy John doesn't just have customers, they have fanatics like myself. Plus, everything is backed by Tommy John's best pair you'll ever wear, or it's free guarantee. Go to TommyJohn.com/lockedon, LOCKED right now. LOCKEDON right now. And you can get 25% off of your first order. That's 25% off at TommyJohn.com/lockedon, TommyJohn.com/lockedon. See site for details. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thank you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day. Make sure you're checking out NFL Key Predictions every Friday over on the Locked On NFL podcast feed, as well as on YouTube. They are breaking down with the Locked On local experts the 5 biggest games every week, including Sunday and Monday Night Football. And, of course, you also get the betting expert advice that you need from the leaders when it comes to betting expertise over at BetOnline. Once again, that is NFL Key Predictions over the Locked On NFL podcast and Locked On NFL YouTube page as well. All right, continuing on with today's episode, I want to take a look at the way that Alvin Kamara was utilized in this game. So this is going to kind of delve into our Analytics Tuesday theme here, but we're not going to go super into the numbers. We're mostly going to focus on like the usage here. There will be a couple of numbers that we'll dive in, but just the really, really important stuff. So when you look at the way that Alvin Kamara was utilized in this game, 29 touches, 194 total yards, Alvin Kamara's game has shifted. It has changed a little bit. And I think for the better. I think so often we see a little bit, you see this sort of the discourse around Alvin Kamara as being a player that you can't hand the ball to 25, 30 times. Remember that? That was kind of the narrative around him 2017, 18, 19, and understandably so, right? You saw him produce so much off of touching the ball 15 to 20 times. Alvin Kamara now is a guy you can give the ball to 29 times, and he'll have this kind of game for you. 235 rushing yards as a whole for the New Orleans Saints, and Alvin Kamara contributed to 103 of those rushing yards. So 2 100-plus yard rushers in this game for the New Orleans Saints. He did that off of 23 carries. And that's really interesting about that is that only 3 of those carries did he actually face an 8-man box. Everything underneath, or everything else, the other 20 carries, he had 15 against a 7-man box, which is pretty usual, 4 down linemen, 3 linebackers, or 3 down linemen, 3 linebackers, and a box safety, or so on and so forth, right? There's so many of those little variations that you can find there. But 15 of those with the 7-man box, and then had 5 more against the 6-man box, and was very active and very successful against all of those. The key here was that it wasn't just that Seattle was refraining from stacking a box. The Saints were keeping them from doing so. And there are a couple different ways that they did it. The Saints played a lot of 12 and 13 personnel. So it's a lot of bigger sets, more tight ends on the field. 12 personnel meaning 1 running back and 2 tight ends. 13 personnel meaning 1 running back and 3 tight ends. And that was without having Taysom Hill counting in those numbers. So they did a lot of that work. And some of it was that J.P. Holtz was utilized out of the backfield. Some of it is that Taysom Hill was utilized in the backfield with J.P. Holtz and Adam Troutman up there. But you also saw Adam Troutman and Juwan Johnson as receiving threats with J.P. Holtz in the backfield. So there's a lot of different ways that they mixed all that up. But one of the things that they didn't do is that they didn't go super traditional with those tight ends. Even after Chris Olave went down and Deontay Hardy was out, you were already missing Michael Thomas. You were already missing Jarvis Landry. So you effectively had 3 healthy wide receivers at that point. Traquan Smith, Marquez Callaway, and then, of course, Keith Kirkwood, who got his first catch back with the team this week. Even when they went out there and had sort of those heavier sets, because that kind of pushed them to more tight ends on the field, they didn't just line them up in line or up against the tackles on one side or the other. they put Juwan Johnson in the slot. He's got wide receiver experience. Remember, he transitioned from wide receiver to tight end while with the New Orleans Saints. So they put him out in the slot. They moved him out wide. They moved Adam Troutman out in the slot, attacked the seams with him, things like that. You saw sort of the play where Taysom Hill threw the touchdown to Adam Troutman. That was effectively an all-go special with Taysom Hill under center in the red zone. Don't let them tell you can't run verticals in the red zone, because you can and you did. That's how you scored a touchdown with Taysom Hill and Adam Troutman. We'll break that down a little bit more in tomorrow's Film Watch Wednesday, as well as all the other unique things the Saints did with Taysom Hill to set up and then break tendencies, or as Dennis Allen referred to in our media session yesterday, counter punches. So we'll break all of that down tomorrow. But that's just an example of how the New Orleans Saints stayed exotic, stayed varied, stayed diverse in terms of their deployment of the run game. So even when they were heavy in tight ends, they still put some of these tight ends out and away from the line of scrimmage, which pulls this man defense, which they'll play a lot of man defense in Seattle. They play a lot of zone defense too, but still it'll pull those linebackers out and away from the box. So that ends up lightening what it is that you're running towards with Alvin Kamara. You had Taysom Hill run for 93 yards on the outside in either direction, but then in the meanwhile, you had Alvin Kamara run for 44 of his 103 yards right in between Eric McCoy and Andres Pete. So the diversity of the run game between the two was also something that made it a little bit tougher for the Seattle Seahawks to stack the box. If they stack the box too much on the inside, the Saints can run outside. If they spread too much on the outside or spread too much laterally, then they ran right up the middle. You saw, a nice little kind of three down lineman play where Alvin Kamara ran for 13, 14 yards on it. So the thing that I'm trying to point out here is that, Seattle's defense is bad. 32nd in the NFL when it comes to rushing yards allowed, 31st in the NFL when it comes to rushing touchdowns allowed, 30th in the NFL, I believe, or 28th in the NFL, actually, when it comes to yards per rush allowed. They're not good. They're very bad. Corbin Smith over at Locked On Seahawks said in yesterday's Seahawks episode, as he was recording, or as he was recapping the game, that the Seattle Seahawks run defense was as bad as old cheese sitting outside in the New Orleans heat for 10 days. It's that stinky. That's what he said. Those are his words. They're terrible. But somebody plays against the NFL's worst rushing defense 17, 18 weeks out of the season, depending upon when the bye week falls and where you are on that ranking when it's your bye week. And not all of those teams that face the NFL's 32nd ranked run defense every week run for 235 combined yards and have two different players account for over 200 rushing yards on their own, nearly 220 rushing yards on their own. You have to do something right. You still have to beat the opponent that's opposite you, and the Saints did that. And I think that a part of why they were able to do that was sort of the diversity of the way that they mixed up everything in the run game, where they attacked with Taysom Hill, where they attacked in the run game with Alvin Kamara, the way that they lined Alvin Kamara out wide and in line and in the slot. They ran different routes with him out of the backfield 6 different times. They, not in the backfield, but lined up out wide in the slot or tight. They did that 6 different times. They also had him run routes out of the backfield. You saw the screen pass that went for 54 yards. That was being set up all throughout the game as well with him as a pass protector. The way that they deployed Alvin Kamara was brilliant in this game. Pete Carroll had what I called an F what you heard, it's what you're hearing type of a day in terms of play calling. He had some really, really good stuff, including the stuff that we'll break down tomorrow with Taysom Hill. But the utilization of Alvin Kamara in this game, the deployment, the alignments, the mismatches, the way that they forced Seattle to basically do their bidding pre-snap, the motion, and the way that that ended up taking people out of the box over in that Seattle defense as well. The New Orleans Saints absolutely manipulated the Seattle Seahawks. And that is something that you want to see from this team against every defense that they go up against, because it doesn't matter who's on the other side. If you can be smarter than the team ahead of you, if you can game plan correctly, if you can get the play calls that you need to be getting in, if you're able to dictate those things as opposed to responding to the gap, responding to the scoring deficiencies, whatever it might be, not deficiencies, I'm sorry, but discrepancies, then you're in control. And the New Orleans Saints showed that when they're in control, they can build their identity off of what they should have been building their identity off of since week 1, and that's Alvin Kamara. Coming up next, Rasheed Shaheed. If you don't know his name yet, you're about to. At least it sounds like it. And I'm going to tell you why as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Before we get to that, I'm going to tell you about our friends over at Bet Online. Luke Braun, my good friend over at Locked On NFL, Locked On Vikings, told a great story last night about watching Monday Night Football. The Kansas City Chiefs down 17 points, so he was able to catch the Kansas City Chiefs on an unfavorable line to still come back and win the game because of live betting modules that they have over at Bet Online. So whenever you see a team that is known for making comebacks like the Kansas City Chiefs, and you see them drop down to a big deficit, that's the time to jump into the live betting module, get some favorable odds or unfavorable odds on that team, and end up walking away with some cash. That's exactly what happened with Luke Braun, and that's exactly what I would recommend that you do for checking out something a little bit different over at Bet Online, because they've got more odds, lines, and props than everybody else. They've also got you covered in terms of the NFL, MLB, NBA, NHL, and so much more. With the NHL getting started today, there's so much to go and check out over at Bet Online, where the game starts. Let's get it. Who Dat Nation, wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a name that you're going to learn if you didn't know it already this weekend, or at least so far as what we've heard. We're going to get an opportunity to finally see him. Number 89, wide receiver and return specialist, undrafted free agent rookie out of Weber State. It's in Utah. Rasheed Shaheed. It's finally time, it sounds like, according to Nick Underhill over at New Orleans.football, second of his reports that I'm quoting in today's episode. He's on fire right now. Rasheed Shaheed is expected to be elevated, or at least news says, right? The sources say that he's expected to be elevated so he can get an opportunity to show what it is that he can do in the return game, because Deontay Hardy is expected to miss significant time with a significant turf toe injury. Usually when they talk about a significant turf toe injury, that usually means a type of turf toe that's a grade 3 and requires some surgery. But we'll see. It could be grade 2, out 4 to 6 weeks, and then back later on in the season. But let's face it, Deontay Hardy was not the all-pro returner that the New Orleans Saints are accustomed to seeing, and they got a little bit of a jolt when Taysom Hill was the guy, right? One of the things that Dennis Allen said in his media availability on Monday is that what he loves about Taysom Hill is no wasted movement. He catches that ball and it immediately gets downhill, no pun intended, and tries to just pick up as many yards as he can, full steam ahead. That's one of the things that makes Taysom Hill so special. But one of the things that you hear from Dennis Allen there is a lot of wasted movement. Rashid Shaheed, a little bit more of a finesse guy, but not a lot of wasted movement in what it is that he does. Let's go over his resume real quick, because he is one of the greatest return men in FCS history. I would even say college football history. He ended his career as the FCS all-time leader in kickoff return touchdowns with 7 of them things. He's the only player in Weber State history to be All-American 4 times. He earned first team All Big Sky honors 4 times, one of 3 players in history to do so. When it comes to what he does as a returner, kickoff return average of 29.1 yards per return. That was Weber State's all-time leader in that average. He also played in 53 games of his career there. I'm reading some of the things off of his bio on the website. 5,478 all-purpose yards, ranks 3rd amongst all those in Weber State history. And he also was 3rd in career punt return yardage, was also 7th in career receiving yards with 2,178, 18 touchdowns, which ranks 10th in his career in terms of receptions as well, with 147. So career punt return yardage leader, FCS all-time kickoff return leader, 3rd in career punt return yards, excellent as a receiver during his time in college as well. He's a little bit of a lighter guy, 6 foot, 180 pounds is what he clocked in at in college. Over on the New Orleans Saints website, I'll take a look at where he clocks in terms of size there here in just a second. But this New Orleans Saints roster and this New Orleans Saints team needs a little bit of a boost at that spot. They're not really getting that. This is a team that usually wins based off of its field position sometimes, right? In terms of limiting field position over on the opposite side, in terms of making a team start further back, but then having a better average starting field position on the opposite end. The New Orleans Saints have not been that team so far. Yeah, on the website for the New Orleans Saints, still clocking in at 6 foot, 180 pounds. We got some opportunities to see Rasheed during training camp, and then also, of course, during practices and things like that every now and then. But, haven't gotten the opportunity to really see him as a kick returner. Didn't get that chance during the preseason, though Kirk Merritt had a really nice return. So even if Rashid Shaheed doesn't work out, the Saints have another option in Kirk Merritt that could end up being that guy. But Shaheed never really got the opportunities to return kicks during training camp or anything like that, because what are you really going to work on there aside from field vision, things like that? But you're still kind of going through the motions more than anything else. It's not full contact. You're not going to risk a player's health in practice and in training camp with full speed returns and full contact returns and things like that. So this will really be our first glimpse as to whether or not Shaheed can take the collegiate production, sort of the legendary collegiate production that he had, and turn it into NFL production. Does it translate to the next level? It looks like we might get that answer this weekend. And again, the New Orleans Saints can absolutely use it. I mean, it was a big deal just having Taysom Hill return out to the 30 a couple of times during Sunday's game against the Seattle Seahawks. If you're all of a sudden breaking some of these for, to the 30, to the 40, to the 50, even bigger, you can steal a special teams touchdown at some point. Those things, that swings the game for you big time, especially with a team that has been struggling on special teams, struggling in its return game, and also struggling with things like turnovers as well. So even if he doesn't break off a big run, even if he does break off a big, kick return or anything like that, can he secure the ball? Can he keep the ball in his hands? Does he put the ball on the turf? Those are going to be the things to watch, because even if he doesn't have like the big flashy 75-yard return for a touchdown, 100-plus yard return for a touchdown on the kickoff or whatever, if he doesn't put the ball on the ground, if he doesn't fumble, if he doesn't turn the ball over, it's an improvement from what you've seen so far. Even Taysom Hill, and of course it was his first return since like 2018 or something, that, he put the ball on the ground. It wasn't turned over. It wasn't, wasn't a giveaway, anything like that. So we're not going to hold it against Taysom, obviously. And it was his first one in a while, but like, it was one of those feelings where it was like, oh, okay, well, the Saints are just going to continue to have this problem. But now maybe with Rasheed Shaheed, they won't. So even if he doesn't break off the big returns and things like that, if he doesn't put the ball on the ground, if he doesn't turn the ball over, the Saints are in a better position than where they were before. Deontay Hardy had a phenomenal rookie season. All pro, coming in as an undrafted free agent, absolutely phenomenal story, fantastic story coming out of Assumption College. He has had moments of greatness since then as well. He's one of the reasons why the Saints beat the Seahawks, a couple of years ago, all of that. But the return game hasn't been what you expect it to be. Really, special teams hasn't been what you expect it to be. So there's some coaching question marks there, but there's also some player execution question marks there, especially when it comes to muffing kickoffs, muffing punts, dropping kickoffs, dropping punts, things like that. So it's time to get a look and see if you're able to find an elevation with somebody else, right? And it's unfortunate that it had to happen because of an injury, but I don't know if the Saints were that far off from at least giving it a shot at some point when they just weren't getting what it is that they assumed or that they expected to get in terms of what the high expectations are from this team, from their returner. And we've seen Dennis Allen do this already. Remember, Peyton Turner was a healthy scratch week 2 of the NFL season after blocking a punt and effectively sealing a game against the Atlanta Falcons on the road because, quote, he wanted to see what else they could get from that position and if it was a kind of, I said quote, now here I am paraphrasing. So let me not say quote, paraphrasing. Basically, they wanted to see if they could get anything better from the position than what they had gotten the week before. And that's why they wanted to get a look at Tano Pasio in place of Peyton Turner. So this isn't new for Dennis Allen. This isn't new for the New Orleans Saints to get a look at someone else. And if Rasheed Shaheed does anything remotely good in terms of not fumbling the ball, not turning the ball over, and in bringing back some nice returns and setting the Saints up with some positive field position, we might not stop seeing number 89 throughout the season. And don't worry, he's going to be elevated off the practice squad probably as a single game elevation. He's not just going to get signed off by some other team. He has all of the opportunity that he needs in New Orleans while Deontay Hardy is injured, and probably beyond that, because Deontay Hardy's not on contract beyond the season. I don't know if he's going to be back in New Orleans next season. If Rasheed Shaheed pops off, Rasheed Shaheed has a future in New Orleans. So I doubt that he's going to go anywhere, regardless of how the New Orleans Saints handle the elevation this weekend. Coming up tomorrow, Film Watch Wednesday, the New Orleans Saints were successful with Taysom Hill, not just because Taysom Hill's really good, which he is and which he was on Sunday, but they set up tendencies and broke tendencies all in the same game. Can they keep doing it as they move forward throughout the season? It's Film Watch Wednesday tomorrow, and we'll break it all down. Appreciate you as always. Make it Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget for your second listen today to go and check out the Peacock and Williamson NFL show. All of the NFL analysis that you need from those that know it best. NFL scout Matt Williamson, former NFL scout Matt Williamson, and NFL analyst Brian Peacock breaking it all down for you on the Locked On NFL YouTube page and Peacock and Williamson wherever you find your podcast. Don't forget to also go check out Jake Madison over at Locked On Pelicans. I appreciate you as always making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day, for making me a part of your day, a part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.